On today's episode, I've got Rob Madden. Rob is a chartered physiotherapist and certified strength and conditioning coach. He has over a decade of experience in high-level sport and currently works for Hintsa Performance, where he is currently placed as a performance coach with an F1 driver. On top of this, he continues to work with professional boxers, including Anthony Joshua, and practices clinically out of the Centre for Health and Human Performance on the reputable Harley Street in London. I'd like to apologise for the audio not being perfect in this episode, but please stay with us because it's a really interesting conversation with Rob. Rob's a great guy, which will be apparent in the episode, and he kindly shares his holistic but also very interesting view of performance, which for him is underpinned by being dual qualified and working in very different sports. Anything that we reference, you'll be able to find in the show notes at informperformance.com. But whatever you're doing whilst you listen to the episode, I hope you enjoy it, and please subscribe to the podcast to receive future episodes from us. Just want to say a big thank you to Tim Tam, a brand that makes vibration or percussion-based recovery products, who have really kindly sponsored the launch of this podcast. They are responsible for the Power Massager and more recently the Pulse Massager, and both are great examples of tools that you can use for soft tissue recovery, especially when you're on the road. If you would like to get your hands on a free power massager, then we're actually running a competition with Tim Tam. All you have to do is subscribe to this podcast on iTunes and follow us on Instagram at Inform Performance. Send us a screenshot that you've subscribed to the DMs of the Inform Performance Instagram page. Then in a few weeks, we'll pick a subscriber at random to win the Tim Tam massager. And in the meantime, check out Tim Tam's Instagram page at Tim Tam Recovery. Rob, welcome to the show, and thanks for giving up your time, mate. I know you're a busy man. Can you just outline exactly who you are and what you do and your background?
Oh, thanks for having me, Andy. I appreciate it. It'll be good to chat. My name's Rob Madden. I'm a physiotherapist and a certified strength and conditioning coach through the NSCA. And at the moment, I'm working as a performance coach under Hintsa Performance, the company, with a Formula One driver, and I continue to support a handful of boxers, including Anthony Joshua and Lawrence Okoli, and occasionally a bit of work with Joshua Bratzi. And I work alongside a team of physios with those to include Ian Gatt, who's head of British Boxing. So we work closely together. And then I maintain my physiotherapy practice at the Centre for Health and Human Performance in Harley Street, and some other private training and physio in and around London with more of a kind of general population. But my main split of time is probably between F1 and boxing, and then I try to, if I have time back in London, I try to keep a bit of variety and width to what I'm doing as a practitioner.
And were you were a physio before you were a strength coach, or qualifying at least in that order?
Yeah, that's right. So I qualified. What was it been now? About 11 years ago as a physio from Bristol UWE. I think we were both there, right?
Yep. Yeah.
I enjoyed my time over in Bristol. Came back to London. And was lucky to start working in high performance sport quite early on in my career, because that was where my passion drove me. And then I was fascinated by performance and S&C, and hung out with a lot of great coaches in the UK and Canada, and finally got around to doing my CSCS out of the States a few years back. But I'd done a bit of the UKSCA courses and quite a lot of personal development in S&C over my career.
That's good. So you're obviously dual qualified. With the kind of athletes that you mentioned you work with, what kind of capacity are you working with them in, as a physio or as an S&C or both?
Yeah, so it depends on the athlete. So within Formula One, you typically find that the performance coaches are dual qualified, and some are more qualified in one than the other. So you find some are more long-term physios that also do a bit of coaching, and vice versa. Some even are more weighted towards, say, nutrition. And as well. So you typically try and cover both elements, which helps purely from a logistical and staffing perspective. When you're traveling the world race to race, you're taking one member of staff with the driver rather than needing to take a whole entourage, which generally works quite well. And you find that also includes the car support. So making sure they're hydrated around when they're in and out of the car, and keeping them at the right temperature, and maintaining the right environment for them so they can do what they need to do. With the other athletes, with the boxers, I typically fall into a physio realm, but closely work with the trainers and S&C coaches around making sure we maintain a robust and thorough program around injury prevention, and making sure we're periodizing things well and monitoring things well, so we keep injury risk low, and we keep the athlete healthy. So there's a lot of communication with say, for example, Anti Joshua, between a lot of us, and that's been a great journey, because I'm working with some great people and learning a lot, and always looking at ways in which you can develop.
I'm guessing when you're in that kind of multidisciplinary team with Joshua, that carries over to when you're more of the kind of one-man band in Formula One. Do you find that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think as well, you probably find it when you were studying, you try and study what's the perfect answer to different solutions, and you realize in elite sport that perfection doesn't exist, and you're always trying to optimize a number of realms, but all sorts of things get in the way of that. So whether it's politics or illness, or just all sorts of things that are beyond your control, working as a tight team to address those things and try and deliver the best you can is always the philosophy.
Yeah. And when you're in that Formula One environment, and you're the main guy supporting the athlete, do you have kind of experts or other professionals that you can turn to if you need specialist help?
Yeah, that's the great thing with the setup with Hintsa. So there's a number of experts, including a fantastic sports doctor and a great nutritionist, that provide us very close support for the athlete. So if there's anything in terms of illness, or they need any medical support, that's really on tap for us, and that's a great thing, a great luxury. And we also have regular nutrition support. I mean, it's generally, you find that as a driver is in their early years, they spend more time learning, and then as they get older, they've got a pretty good knowledge of the realms of performance around nutrition and recovery and training, and they're able to kind of have less contact time with other practitioners, if that makes sense. But certainly for myself, my main realms of physio and strength and conditioning and everything that kind of encompasses that. I'm not a pro nutritionist, and I have decent knowledge, but far from expert knowledge. So I like to always try and get good nutritional advice and support with all of my clients.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because what you're describing is, I guess, a bit of a sort of in a high quality way, it's a generalist approach, isn't it? You're doing a bit of a few different things, which I don't know about you, but I find that when you're training, you're kind of taught to try and head towards being a specialist or an expert.
Yes.
In something. So I guess being a generalist is quite different. How are you finding that kind of journey?
Yeah, that's a good question and a good topic. I mean, I was very focused on my physio career in its purity for the first 5 years probably, and then became more and more interested in the mind, how emotions change things, and how the personality of an athlete or just a general client is so complex and can create so many challenges. Nutrition, as I said, is another interesting area, and I think that it's you can do so much in in those realms of nutrition and psychology and training and recovery, that actually sometimes if you're too specialist, you can miss some really easy wins. And I probably shifted my philosophy to a more general outlook, like in that fashion, when I joined the team at CHHP. People like James Moore and Greg White, the physiologist, and Dr. Mike Loosemore, Jack Kreinler, all the directors there, they opened my eyes to this whole world of multifaceted support. And I wanted to learn more about different areas. And as I say, I'm not an expert in those areas, but I can probably chip away at different realms with a client. And if a client comes in who's overweight and has lower back pain and is maybe going through a divorce and is quite low in their mood, there's so much to get your teeth into. And the back pain most likely is just a sort of an output of several things going on. And I think it's really important for us as coaches to be able to address those things. And if we don't feel comfortable addressing maybe depression or low mood around a divorce, then we bring in a psychologist or we bring in a mind coach so that we can really look after the client. And I think too much of the time, I would say physios can just end up really focusing on small things, like if it's lower back pain, and they ignore all of those other things I've just said. They're focusing on kind of articular translation at the lumbosacral junction and really specific soft tissue articulations and things that I don't really feel are that important anymore. When the big picture is right in front of you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the bigger picture and joining the dots for it.
That's it. Absolutely, yeah.
And obviously, the context that you work when you're on your own. How does that differ to work in a kind of bigger team, or I guess in a sports context, a full athletic team of athletes with lots of staff? How do you find the role changes?
To be honest, it's really improved my my organisation and approach to meticulous detail and trying to be one step ahead, really, because the basis of what I do isn't that different, but you've suddenly got a little bit more responsibility when you're on the ground with an athlete. Perhaps he doesn't have a PA or anyone to do that side when you're on the ground. So you ending up doing a bit of admin, a bit of kit logistics. You're doing making sure his media commitments are in the diary, and he's getting there on time. And so it's not very glamorous, but it is important. And I would also I've seen that with, say, for example, with AJ, because of his brand and the amount of media he has to do, that we really have a massive challenge on our hands between the performance team and then the media team to really make sure that everything is timely and organized, and that he's not overdoing it as well. So it's that's been really, really interesting for me, and I've learned a lot about the big picture of a high profile athlete and how you need to kind of consider so many different things.
It's a lot of moving parts. Do you think if you're looking at the kind of skill set difference between what you do and what a more typical team setting member of staff would be doing, do you think it's more interpersonal things and personal attributes that allow you to adjust to it, or do you think there's a harder skill set that you need?
That's a good question. I think that personality is integral. I always tended to favour working with individual athletes, and if you look at my career, I did a lot of individual sport and not that much team sport. And I really enjoy the relationship building and the intimacy you can build with an athlete one-to-one, and it can be really difficult if you've been in each other's face for a week or two. You see each other as much as you see your wife, and it can be quite intense. But I think having a flexible approach is important, and being a little bit of a chameleon to adjust to when they're maybe they don't want you around, or when they're in a really good place, you're up there with them, and when they're not in such a good place, you don't want to be the guy that's pushing them to be too positive, because you might, that can go down the wrong way as well. So yeah, it's a challenge, but I think I think that hard set skills. You mentioned hard set skills are absolutely integral as well, to have to tick the right boxes, that as a physio and as a strength and conditioning coach, you can deliver what that athlete needs. But beyond that, I remember Chris Price at the EIS, when I did a bit of work with him, he always said to me that athlete management is 90% personality. And if you don't really get on with the athlete, or you don't feel the energy's there, then you probably shouldn't be doing the job, or you shouldn't consider the job. I think it's very important to meet an athlete before you take something on like that.
When you're with an athlete, and you're in a training camp, or you're with them one-to-one leading up to a race or whatever the event is, I'm guessing at times it's quite an intense training and preparation environment. How, as a kind of professional working in that, how do you deal with that pressure, and how do you kind of look after yourself as a coach or physio, and your kind of ability to be consistent and happy, and I guess offer your service optimally?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question, and one I struggle to keep short, because I spend a lot of time thinking about it and working on myself, as well as, if you can't be in a good place yourself, you can't be a good coach. And that's, people like Brett Bartholomew would always say that you have to really truly know yourself and be in a great place to be a good person for an athlete. And if you're confused, or you're stressed, it's certainly not the right place to be in. So I try and keep my answers short, because I don't want to sort of go too deep. But I would share two things. The first thing would be where it's gone wrong for me, where not so much wrong, but where I was in a fairly bad place after being on the road for 2-3 months in 2014 in the build up to the Sochi Winter Olympic Games. And I'd been traveling constantly from Canada to Europe to North America, back to Europe, and then to Russia. And I shared a room with two other coaches who I loved, and they were great, for about 2.5-3 weeks in the Olympic Village. And by the end of the Olympics, I was so over it and so ready to have time to myself. I was pretty burnt out. I was pretty exhausted, and I didn't really want to see anyone when I got back. I was just focused on just having time to myself. And after a few weeks, I kind of found my drive and my happiness and my passion again. But it definitely taught me a lesson, and taught me that, even if you are on the road relentlessly, you need to be able to find time to do the things that make you feel good, and to certainly have time on your own, and these days, I take it a lot easier as well. In between, I'm very, very fortunate that I don't have to work and see hundreds of clients when I'm off. So if I'm off, like there's a big fight's just finished, or I've just done 2 races back to back, or heavy period with the F1 driver, I can take a week or 2 off and take a holiday. Whereas in the past, I used to have to come back. From a financial perspective, I'd be in a clinic, jet lagged, and it would just compound the exhaustion and the stress. So I just try to keep fit. I think we talked about it the other day, and the training, or low intensity cardio when I shift time zones, making sure I get at least 5 sleep cycles a night, so it's around 7.5 hours. Eat as good as I can, enjoy the odd glass of wine, but generally, if I'm traveling, I try not to drink alcohol, and I try to do the things that I know are mindful / meditative for me as an individual. So playing golf, or listening to music. Music's huge for me. So being able to tap into my parasympathetic nervous system and keep myself on track, because the time you go past that and you get into that stressed state, your immune system suffers. And I've been there many, many times where I've had, frequent colds or it flu because I've just been overdoing it, and then you're useless, right, Andrew? You're useless because you can't coach, you can't get close to the athlete. So I think, thank you for the question, and it's nice to reflect as well, actually, and it reminds me of, it's given me a little reminder of my current priority, so to speak.
No, thanks for your honesty on that.
Yeah, one thing about me, anyone who knows me, is I'll always be transparent. Yeah.
Which I guess, if the athletes are aware of that as well, then that goes a long way.
I hope so. Yeah, that's it.
And what I'm curious about as well, mate, is, obviously when you're with these athletes and you're with them in person delivering your services, be that physiotherapy or be that training stuff, are you working with them remotely when you're away from them and you're at home?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I do with clients, and particularly with the Formula One drivers, send cardiovascular training programs or workouts where his training age is good enough now for me to be able to send a workout and know that he doesn't need me to hold his hand. So that's good. And I work closely with a guy called David Whiteman, who's a really great trainer, and we always plan the week of training together, and whether he's with us or not, we'll send regular workouts. So yeah, I think the future with technology and everything is interesting, and I think that we'll be able to get better and better at the remote coaching. And I think sometimes I tend to keep it quite simple, because if you end up overdoing a Excel spreadsheet with videos and hyperlinks, it looks great, but I find the majority of clients don't really want that.
Yeah, I think you can put it on the dashboard, but it doesn't drive the car.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know, how do you find it? Do you do much remote stuff yourself?
Yeah, I do a little bit of remote stuff. Actually, you've just slammed Excel, but I use a little bit of Excel, but I try and keep all of it on Excel.
Yeah.
I try to not use too many different apps or ways of kind of communicating data with an athlete. I try and just keep it all in one place if I can. Maybe two different things. One for video and then one for the numbers and periodization, or whatever you're dealing with. But I try to keep it simple.
Great. Yeah, I think alongside the monitoring, which I know we were maybe going to talk about, having everything in one place is definitely a good idea. And I think that with technology and cloud drives now, like whether you're using iCloud Notes or iCloud Excel, or the Windows equivalent of a cloud, you can share live data with an athlete, and it's a great way to kind of keep on track of things and share with the wider team.
I'm mindful you might have to be sensitive about this with the people you work with, but are there kind of health and wellness or gym related data that you kind of personally focus on with your athletes, be that F1 or boxing or whoever you're with?
Yeah, I think without going into all the detail, I think that monitoring is, for me, it can be done really, really well, and it depends a bit on the client how well it's done. And with some setups, I've really struggled to get consistent monitoring. And Pete McKnight, who's the head coach for Hintsa and was head of chairman for the UKSCA for a number of years, is a great guy, and has taught me a lot about monitoring and the importance of it, because I know it's one of his real specialisms. And I think that sometimes simple monitoring is all you need. I also think that we can overdo it. So I typically, as well as my colleagues, I really like to just get a simple RP and time on a regular basis, as well as qualitative wellness scores on sleep and mood and overall muscle aches, and then coupling that up with wearable technology in some situations, and that's a little bit of a different topic, but I think they overlap nicely. So did you have any other points or questions or thoughts yourself there in that area?
Yeah, I guess like I think the thing that springs to mind is, like you mentioned RPE. I don't think that will ever go out, will it? We've got HRV is quite focused on at the moment, and velocity is very focused on in an S&C world. Both completely justifiable, I think, in the right context. But I think some of the basics, like is the athlete in pain? How are their DOMs? RPE, sleep, how do they feel today? Are they motivated? I think those kind of basic wellness ones are kind of sticking around forever, and they're very low tech.
Absolutely. I'll just to give a kind of example, I think just take a boxer who's in kind of a heavy training phase, and they've got a really busy spar on the Friday, a busy day and a spar on the Friday, and you're on the Wednesday. You've got 2 sessions planned: a strength and conditioning session in the morning, and then you've got a technical session in the afternoon, say on the pads. And the athlete comes in and says, "Oh, you know what? I'm feeling a bit under the weather," and their resting heart rate's up, and you generally feel like they're on the edge of getting ill, and you have to be able to make a decision as an individual or as a team whether or not to pull the athlete. And I'm not going to say what the answer is, but I think that's the typical challenge that we face. And obviously in many environments and sports, they have a set way of doing things. So at Manchester United, if that happened, they probably have a point where they'd say, okay, we're going to rest this player, and so they're healthy for the weekend. But then I'm sure I've heard, like yourself, I've heard lots of examples where that doesn't happen, and they continue to push the athlete, and the athlete breaks down or gets injured or gets sick. So it's a real challenge, that I think, when being able to be confident to push and when to pull, and actually say to the head coach or whoever, you know what, I really think we should take today off and have a rest day. It's not easy.
Yeah, and just use clinical reasoning and human judgment rather than kind of relying on the algorithm. Yeah,
exactly. I always thought that it's an interesting one, because I also had a great chat with Robin Thorpe, who was at Manchester United for a long time. He was the head of recovery, and he gave me some great insights to how they monitor things, and how they were kind of looking after player health. And also I read a really good article by Rio Ferdinand a few years ago, when he was talking about how it's possible to be overly scientific to the point where we're developing essentially less resilient athletes, because we're monitoring so many tiny things that if we haven't ticked every box, we're then resting them. And his whole point was, actually, you turn up with a slight cold, and your urine's slightly darker, so what, crack on, just make sure your fluids are up, and get on with it. And actually, that you can argue both ways, right? And it's quite interesting to think how players back in the day with like George Best and Bobby Charlton and stuff, I mean, can you imagine what they were used to do? And they got away with it, so who knows? It's interesting.
I think you can put too much data and detail in front of the athlete, and I think depending on their mentality, can they handle those numbers and kind of stay clear-headed about them, or does it occupy their mind in a negative way?
Yeah, that's it. And I know we talked about it the other day a bit about monitoring, and I've used, typically I don't use much. I use the Polar H10 for training sessions. I think is an amazing bit of kit for keeping an eye on accurate heart rate zones. Apple Watch is great for the general population, and I also have used the Oura Ring that many listeners might have heard of, and really interesting bit of kit that has 3 sensors on the inside of the ring, one measuring heart rate, the other temperature, the other movement, and it gives you a great bit of feedback around sleep and heart rate variability and all the other things we know get monitored with nighttime. And just as you've just said, I've found that it gives you so much data, as well as giving you either a positive or a negative reinforcement in the morning. Okay, your sleep wasn't great last night, you should take it easy today. Now, if that's around a spar, or it's anything important in a training session, or even a race, that could be massively negative psychological reinforcement. So I think what I've learned from just using the kit is, and it could apply to any kind of wearable technology, is to use it to improve that individual's ability to understand themselves and self-coach as well, but not to use it permanently. And I think that there's all sorts of other issues that can arise. People can become obsessed with their Fitbit or their Apple Watch, and it's really, I think it's really important to be able to, for you and I as coaches, to be able to say, okay, cool, you've given me 2 weeks of data. I want you to go away and just not wear it now for a bit. And because I think that it can be both positive and negative as a technology.
Yeah. Do you find that you have to, or do you have any strategies for how you kind of get athletes' eyes off their data? If it's like the day they're competing or they're getting close to an event, do you ever kind of try and take their eyes off that data strategically around those times?
That's a good question. Typically, we try, if it's coming really close to a major event, I would just avoid gathering the data, or at least if I am gathering it, not allow them to access it. Yeah. But the challenge being, if you're gathering qualitative data such as how's your mood, how did you sleep, how do you feel physically, that they need to self-reflect, and that can compound. So I guess again, it's a bit like you have to be able to know your athlete and be able to reassure them if they are coming back saying, I'm a 5 out of 10 for mood, my sleep last night was a 4 out of 10, and my muscle aches are 7, and they're 3 days out of a major event. Then you're able to sit them down and say, okay, let's come up with a strategy now, for these next couple of days around improving your sleep and getting you calm, and maybe you decide as a coach or as a team to say, you know what, let's not monitor the next 2 days. Let's just focus on things we can control and not ask for wellness. I think that's just being able to adapt to what we've got in front of us. Yeah.
I've got a bit of a beast of a question to ask you, just to finish up with.
Okay. Are you going to put me on the spot?
Yeah, and it's going to be largely context specific, and I know you may have to be careful about what you say with regards to the athletes, but under this assumption that you work with an athlete closely one-to-one, you could have all the time in the world you need with them, or a lot more time with them than you would, say, with an athlete in a team sport setting. What things do you focus on doing with them, and how much of those interventions or types of training do you do with them, given that you might have greater freedom of time with the athlete?
Okay. I would say my approach to coaching, if it's just me, is to try and deliver across 4 pillars, being training, recovery, nutrition, and mindset. Now, if we start with mindset, I suppose either way, whether I know the athlete or say, for example, it's a new athlete. If it was a new athlete, it's quite interesting to use that as an example, because the most important thing for me would to be able to sit down with them over a coffee for 3 hours or 2 hours at least, and just get to know them and understand their values, their goals, their challenges, and their hopes and their aspirations and their expectations for what they want from you. For me, that type of interaction needs to happen on a regular basis, and sometimes it can't happen, and that's where it's frustrating. If I'm with an athlete, but there's lots of other people around and there's lots of noise, and the bigger the athlete, the more you find that it's much harder to get really good quality one-to-one time with them. But I think that type of conversation you can have with an athlete regularly about how they're feeling and where they're at, and otherwise you can't deliver what you need to. And then really a split. I mean, as I said earlier, the nutrition, I would always ask for a real pro to come in to support me, and then I'd be on the ground to monitor how their consistency is with their nutrition. So then to just go on to the other 2 areas, training and recovery, would depend a little bit on the individual's training age, but I would spend kind of 50-50 on each, because I think I was listening to a lecture the other day where the coach was talking about, well, you can't train if you're not rested, and we all know this. So for me, recovery is still just so it's just underestimated how important it is, even in real professional athletes, whether that's sleep or whether that's physical modalities to improve their soreness. And that would be, I suppose, if you asked me this question 5 years ago, I probably would have given you a different answer, and I wouldn't have homed in on the recovery as much. And maybe that's partly down to my own personal journey as well, as I feel that the better rested I am, the better headspace I'm in, the more I can deliver physically and as a coach. So I know how important it is to tick both of those boxes. And if you're pushing yourself and you're not resting, you're just going to go backwards.
I guess it's not too surprising, but you're still playing it by ear and basing it on how the athlete's feeling and presenting as to how much you can then get away with doing with them or focusing on.
Yeah, exactly. And I've loved spending time with different physiotherapists and different strength and conditioning coaches who just have really taught me so much. And you can see how well some people do it, how they can adapt, because we're planners, right? We love to plan. We love to write a session and have all our loads and volumes planned and our interval reps and intensities and everything written out. And then what do you do if you turn up and they're complaining of a niggle, or that as we said earlier, that they might be on the cusp of getting sick, and that's the challenge, and that's what kind of keeps the job interesting, I guess.
Brilliant, mate. That was a big question, and thank you very much for answering that one. Thanks for giving up your time today, mate. And
no worries.
I really appreciate those insights and honesty you've given us on all those topics.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I hope if I can help one person or significantly improve someone's outlook, then I feel positive about it, and hopefully, a few people have taken something away from it. So,
yeah, no doubt. And where can listeners kind of keep up to date with what you're up to or follow you?
Just going under Rob Madden PT, and I probably should try and push a little bit more online. I haven't really. I've been a bit lazy the last year or so, but maybe you've given me a bit of inspiration to give it a push, because I know you're doing the same. So it's the modern world. We've got to keep up with the youth, right, Andrew?
Yeah, exactly. And is that Rob Madden PT? Is that your Twitter handle, or is that Instagram?
That's both. Yeah, both under the same, mate. Yeah, that's right.
Cool. And last question is there any resources or tools or places that you'd recommend people go to, upskill and learn? Anything that you're using or following at the moment?
I mean, there's lots. I think it depends on that individual's path, and whether they're looking at developing themselves in one area or another. What I would say is if anyone has any specific areas they want to develop in, then they could reach out to you and me, and we could try and point them in the right direction. I'm really enjoying reading a book at the moment, just called Performance Coaching by Sir John Whitmore. That was actually recommended by James Moore, and I'm really enjoying that. And the one thing it's really making me think about is me as a practitioner. I don't question enough. I don't give commands. I'm not like that, but I tend to throw information at people, and particularly if it's in an area I know a lot about. And I think it's very easy to do for us as a coach. So it's just reminding me that questioning as a style of coaching is everything. And I'm just trying to upskill in that, and I would recommend that book to listeners, because I think we can always improve in that area.
And is that questioning your kind of activities and interventions with people, or is that questioning the athletes and what they're doing?
That's just to re-explain, using questioning as a style of dialogue. rather than, so if someone comes to me and says, I don't feel like I'm getting any fitter despite all the low intensity cardiovascular work I'm doing. So then for you and I would think, oh, okay, well, we've got this. We know, have you heard about high intensity training, or have you thought about this? And, and then we give them a bullet point list of things to do that can improve their VO2 max other than low intensity cardio. But the way in which this book would encourage you to approach it would be to first challenge them on why are they doing it that way, and why do they think that's the important way, and have they heard about high intensity training, and actually slowly try and get that client to almost find the information for themselves rather than give it to them on a plate. And it takes more time, and it's hard because it's not as quick, and it can be a more frustrating way of interacting with someone. But for me, it's the way we need to do it as coaches, and a lot of the time.
Yeah, and get all that information from them that you can.
Exactly. I mean, obviously there's a time and place for it. If you've been with an athlete 5 years, you're probably going to do it less. But I think in the early stages, we talked about, when I'm trying to get to know someone, their values, their goals, their aspirations, try and use more and more questioning to make them reflect on what they're currently doing and how they can change and evolve without giving them just a list of information. I'm not perfect at it, and I think Brett Brafomir again is another. I've mentioned him earlier. His book, The Art of Coaching, talks about it a lot, and the actual interaction side of what we do, I think, is really, really interesting.
It's definitely a hot topic at the moment, isn't it? How you actually coach and your coaching health.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely.
Well, mate, I think that's all we've got time for today. But again, really, thank you very much for giving us all those insights and giving us some of your time. I really appreciate it.
Nice to speak to you, Andrew. And thanks for listening, everyone, and keep in touch.